Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 96. I want to introduce you tonight to a gentleman that I've got a ton of respect for because he really has a secret in trying to motivate people and coach people in how to make great speeches and more important than that, how to tell great stories. And one of his secrets is, at least I think, he conveyed to me that they have to have a core message, a signature issue or problem or idea or story that really makes their story, their speech compelling. And I love that idea. Michel Neray is his name. He's a professional speaker, consultant, creator of Inside Out Storytelling, and the founder of Mo Mondays that I had the privilege of speaking at on, frankly, it was more than half a dozen times in about 4 different locations, Michel. And so thank you for that. It was a monthly storytelling event that pre-COVID was in 16 different cities around North America. He's helped thousands of individuals and organizations to drill down to their core message, become category leaders through category design, and craft more impactful stories to become more effective leaders, salespeople, effective leaders, salespeople, coaches, teachers, trainers, speakers, and influencers of all types. He's also used the insight approach to differentiate, position, and brand organizations in the market. And he's now launched a new program on effectively this topic that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. Michel Neray. And I should say as well, the guy is an incredible musician, and he's invited me to his house. I guess a couple of times where he put on a few concerts, and I don't know how I got off the list, Michel, but those were wonderful concerts, and you're an incredible musician. In addition to your incredible speaking capabilities and your coaching capabilities, so thank you for that. Welcome everyone to Michel Neray. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Brian. It's an honor to be here. We've known each other a long time, haven't we?
It actually has been. It was mid 2010s, I think it was, when it was first, maybe even, it was, I think, one of your very first Mo Mondays in Mississauga. And I was invited to speak at it. And I spoke and I met you for the first time, and you gave me some really good suggestions on my presentation, how to improve it and how to shorten it. I remember that. You kept on saying, shorten it, Brian, shorten it. And to find my core message. And I really appreciate you and your assistance in that regard. And then I spoke in Toronto, I spoke in London. I can't even remember where else, several different places. And
you were a big draw wherever you spoke.
It was a fun time. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Michel, tell me about this new program that you're launching, if you could.
So by new program, you mean core messaging?
Yes.
So funnily enough, it's not really a new program. I'm just packaging it up kind of as new, but it's something that I've been doing a very, very long time. So long before you and I met, I had an ad agency. I was a copywriter, communications expert, and it was kind of my job to help my clients tease out their core, their differentiation. We didn't have words for it back then. And so it was my job to go and interview them, work with them, because, you know, what would normally happen is companies, corporations, businesses, they go out and they work on their advertising, their marketing, and messaging wasn't a thing. We're talking 25 years ago. They didn't know about messaging. They knew about differentiation. They didn't really know about messaging. And you wonder why companies end up with the same old taglines and things that don't really resonate, but, you know, it's what their marketing experts, so-called, told them to use, you know, sales, service, selection, and whatever it is. You know, we really care about our people. You've seen that on a bank wall or two. And I couldn't deal with that. That's if I recommended that for my clients, they wouldn't be any different than anybody else. So it really became my mission, my passion, my vision to help my clients dig deeper than the usual bump, what I call the marketing bump, to what really set them apart. And you'll understand why in a second, how this actually led to storytelling and Mo Mondays, et cetera, et cetera. I ended up working with a lot of tech startups run by brilliant engineers who think everything is more complicated than it needs to be when it comes to communications. And or that's how I felt. And what I discovered was that every time I helped them dig down to their real differentiation, something that was probably staring them in the face, but they couldn't see it because they expected it to be more complicated than it was. It became and if I dig a little deeper, what I discovered is that there was always a story behind their core difference, and it was so obvious, so part of the fabric of everything they do that they couldn't see it, but it really was the most important thing that they did. And if I could just focus on that, and they would always look at me and they say, "Oh no, are you kidding? That's all. That's it." I say, "That's it." And I realize, Brian, let me ask you something. I'll ask you this question, then I'll shut up and you can ask me another question. But has anyone ever paid you a compliment?
Yes.
And I hope so. And your first response is to say, I don't know. Yeah, thanks. It's nothing. It's just what I do.
Yep.
You've had that experience, right?
I have had that experience, yes.
That is such a gift when somebody gives you one of those. And it's such a gift for you to give yourself, to realize that the very fact that it feels like nothing to you is actually a clue that it's something very, very important. It's something that comes so easily to you. You do so naturally, you don't even realize that you do it, and you don't realize the value for other people. But the reason why they're giving you a compliment is because it's hard for them, easy for you.
Okay.
And so, I mean, when I started out in this business, my clients would say, "How did you get to our differentiation so quickly?" And I'd say, it's just what I do. And it took me many years for me to appreciate, wait a minute, there's something I do that's special. There's some way that my brain works that's slightly different than the way that other people do. I hope so. Pity everybody else, but different than everybody else's brain works. And it really hones in on the core differentiation. So, I used to tell, like we're talking 25 years ago, I'd tell my clients, I'd go in with core difference as being the thing that they were hiring me for, that differentiation. And I didn't tell them, but what they end up with was a story. Now, because of the story being a buzzword in business, I tell people, I'm going to help you find your story. But what I don't tell them is that, and you know what, when you come out of it, you'll also know your core differentiation. And core messaging is what I'm framing it as being the thing that connects core messaging, that connects the core difference with the story that resonates with the audience and listeners that you're speaking to, all your stakeholders, not just your customers, but your employees, your staff, your key partners, your investors, the media, the press, et cetera, et cetera. Is this making sense?
No, it does. In business school, we're always taught, or in business books, that you have to have a unique selling proposition, that you've got to have, some sustainable competitive advantage. You've got to have something unique. Otherwise, you're just a commodity. And why would people pay anything more for you if you're just a commodity? And so I think that makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint. But from a storytelling standpoint and a speech making standpoint, the words you used with me, and this was probably a decade ago, but the words you used with me really, really resonated with me, because what you said is, Brian, everyone has a signature story. And I love that description, and I've used it myself. I apologize for plagiarizing you in that regard, but it resonated with me because I do think that that's true. And I've interviewed, Michel, and frankly, honestly, thankfully, thanks to you and some of your coaching of me and your inspiration of me on this radio show, I've interviewed over 1,500 people. And it's not like a speech at Mo Mondays, because the people don't prepare the same way they would for a speech and memorize what they're going to say and stuff. But the benefit to me of what I do is I get to people in a slightly less guarded kind of scenario, less rehearsed kind of scenario, and I get to be curious and really ask them questions. And both before the interview and during the interview, I encourage people to open up about whatever their signature story is, or whatever that catalyst was that created who they are today. And I found that number one, everyone does have that signature story. A lot of people don't want to admit it and don't know what it is, and don't want to necessarily, particularly if it was a tough, bad story, tell the world about it. But when they do either realize it and or tell the world about it, or tell me about it in an interview, they come to a very important realization of why they used a divorce, or used a loss of a job, or used a cancer, or used, whatever that thing was that happened to them, to turn their life around, or find their passion, or make a big change, or something like that. And it doesn't always have to be something bad. Sometimes it's something good, like they won a race, or they got a new job, but there's often something that happens to people that really is a catalyst for them to make a change. And that, I have found, is their signature story, is their unique selling proposition, is their uniqueness in life.
Yeah. I'm listening to you and I'm saying, God, those could be words that you could have asked me that, and I would have answered you in exactly the same way. So thank you. And a signature story is not trademark. It's not mine. It's actually a common term in the speaking world. And it is the story that explains why you do what you do. I take it a little bit further. It's the story that explains why you do how you do what you do, because my interest is what we all do basically the same thing. In any business, we all do the same thing. We all promise our customers, our clients, pretty much the same thing, but how we get there is different. And how we get there is informed by our worldview, by our experience, our baggage, and very often, this is why I say you got to dig deeper. Very often, it's triggered by exactly what you were saying, by some pivotal experience. And very often, it is even when it's a good experience, it's a good experience that came about because of an obstacle that was overcome. There's always an obstacle. Like any good story, like any good movie, like any book, there's always an obstacle that you have to get over. And it's in the coming over that obstacle, coming past through that wall that was there before, where that you get the insight. And now it's not always conscious. Sometimes it just gets embedded into your core difference, your differentiation. And but it's always there. And you're right. A lot of people are afraid to look there. Some people think, oh, and you've seen this at Mo Mondays or anytime, oh, people don't want to hear about that. That's the bad part. But that part is the part where all the learning springs from.
And hearing about that part is what makes them authentic and vulnerable. And I think hooks people, because they understand the story. And if someone's got, these are the 10 things you got to do, or the 5 things you got to do, or blah, 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 whatever happens to be, it sounds and feels like it's just, rote repetition of some. But if it comes from an authentic challenge, an obstacle that was experienced and overcome, then people are grabbed by it, and they realize the person really is an authentic individual that's gone through a challenge and a problem and dealt with this obstacle and come through the other end. That said, Michel, I got to tell you, you've got a secret sauce. And the secret sauce is that you help people figure that out better than anyone I've ever met. And that's what I thought your program was called, about dig deeper, and dig deeper to figure out what that core message is. And so let's take a break for some messages and come back. And I'm going to ask you how the heck you dig deeper, because I think that it really is a secret. Stay with us, everyone. We're going to be back in 2 minutes after some messages with Michel Neray of Mo Mondays, of coaching, of music, of inspiration, of digging deeper to figure out what your core message is. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saturday Night 60. My guest tonight is Michel Neray. He's got a website. What's the website called, Michel?
It's my last name.com. So Neray.com,
And on that
Neray.com.
and on that website, you offer what, coaching for digging deeper to figure out what your core message is, and other.
It's about my consulting, my speaking programs, my training workshops. And it's very much about helping my clients and people who come there dig down to their core message, which, as we talked about earlier, is kind of like the connection between your differentiation and the story behind it.
So I'm not sure if you watched this show on TV that I fell in love with, Ted Lasso. And he's got this one famous line where he is at the dartboard, and he's in a dart competition, and he quotes a Walt Whitman quote about be curious, not judgmental. And that's what I think you are. You're incredibly curious, and you've really taught me that that skill of being curious and not being judgmental, and that curious nature, where you asked me a ton of questions and taught me to ask other people questions about that core message. I think was one of the secrets to your success. But tell me, if you could, how do you go through this dig deeper process? What's the secret sauce in the dig deeper?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. The secret sauce really is about curiosity. And they're not fancy questions. But I will say they're counterintuitive questions. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And maybe I should explain why that's important, is because I believe that and I've seen this, if you ask the same old marketing questions, you're going to get the same old marketing responses. It's because our brains get easily triggered to, oh, I know the answer to that one. We all want to answer. Well, oh, I know the answer to that one. So we come out with what we've always come out with, and we never dig any deeper than that. And what I discovered, and I actually laid it out in that blog, that newsletter that you responded to, because I said, I'm not going to keep this to myself. I want people to be able to do this. This is like a mission of mine. And unfortunately, I think we've been so trained to think positive that we only frame the questions in the positive. So, but that's like saying, well, I'm going to ask you what makes you different. What makes us different is, we really care about our people, or we really care about our customers, whatever. So you have to figure out a way to ask the question in a roundabout way so that it almost tricks the brain. And by the way, since I've been doing this, I realize there's tons of neuroscience that backs me up. I mean, it works, and it's scientifically based. I just didn't know it at the time. They didn't have fMRI machines in 2003 when I actually started developing this methodology. But I realized that, first of all, there's something called the negativity bias. Negativity bias is we more easily and more quickly focus on the negative things than on the positive. It's a survival skill.
Right.
It's something that that's in our DNA. That's how we're wired. And so I started to realize that we don't do anything for the positive, really. Benefits are important, but benefits are only important when they're related to an obstacle or a negative that we're struggling with. It's like, if you don't have a problem, you don't need the benefit. So now let's go back and say, what's the problem?
So it's back to this old marketing thing about you got to solve customers' problems.
You got to solve the problem, and you have to make them resonate with that problem. Now, chances are you can't go right away to the core problem because that's too many steps removed. But you can certainly talk about the symptoms of the problems that they're experiencing, that they will say, oh, yeah.
Well, you did that in your post, I thought, in a great way, because you said, I think it was something like, you got to think about what those things are that make you go crazy.
Yeah. What are the things that make you crazy? That comes from a workshop I developed several years ago called What Drives You Crazy Makes You Great.
What drives you crazy makes you great. Well, that's counterintuitive.
Yeah, yeah. What drives you crazy makes you great. Because it points to what makes you great. And the fact that it makes you crazy is an indication that you want to work on it, that you will work on it, and that you actually see the light on the other side, so you know how to get through it. And going back to the story, and I just want to touch on this for a second, but you talked earlier about signature story. If you go back far enough, it's the problem that you've been struggling with your entire life. So in many cases, not always, but in many cases, you can go back to your childhood and realize, oh my God, that's why I do it this way. That's why I approach life this way. That's why I solve problems this way. That's why I ask questions like this. Get where I'm going with this? So,
Yep.
so you can get pretty deep. You don't have to, and it's not always relevant, but it's surprising. That's why my leadership style is this way. That's why I've built my company this way. Anyway, so yes, counterintuitive. What is the problem that you yourself have faced in your life that informs? So, in other words, what do you here's one of the questions, and it's not the first question that I ask, but one of the questions is, what drives you crazy about the way that your competitors operate? So I'll ask that again. What drives you crazy about the way that your competitors operate? And specifically, it drives you crazy because you know deep down it doesn't work for the customer or client. You know deep down it's counterproductive for the end successful result that we all want our clients and customers to have. You know deep down it just is short-sighted. And if we could talk about that, because I guarantee you it drives you crazy because you know there's a better way of doing it. And it points to how you do what you do differently than how your competitors do what they do. Now, nobody wants to slag their competitors. It doesn't look good on anybody, but it's counterintuitive because it points to what you do differently. Does that make
And or
sense,
what you've got to, yes, it does make a ton of sense. And what you do differently and why you do it differently, and that you have to accentuate in your marketing and your competitive positioning and to create the competitive advantage.
Yep. Yep. And not just your competitive advantage, but it goes back to what you were talking about earlier. So you've interviewed over 1,500 people on this show, and you've used kind of this approach and your own curiosity to dig a little bit deeper than maybe they're used to from a interviewer. And you realize that, oh my God, like they realize they discover something about themselves that they kind of knew, sort of knew, but didn't really know at the top of their minds. It wasn't really out there. It was, they had an inkling, maybe if they were stopped long enough to think about it, they got off that treadmill long enough to think about it. Say, oh yeah, that is what makes me different. And that is why I built this into my company or my service or whatever.
And a lot of them either don't realize it, or if they realize it, they don't want to admit it to themselves, and they certainly don't want to admit it to the world. But as soon as they do, they become a lot stronger. They become a lot more authentic, and
It's empowering, isn't it? It's
is.
empowering in your self-confidence because you know where it comes from. It's empowering in your self-confidence because you can articulate it more clearly. And it's not like you need just like, oh, it's just an insight and it just comes, but it comes through conversation like the ones that we're having.
Well, you in your blog you talk about the dig methodology, and I really like this because you use the dig deeper and the dig methodology and the DIG to break it into three phases: discover, identify, and galvanize. Can you walk me through those three phases?
Yeah, discovery really is, and as from a consulting methodology, it's not all that different from your standard best practices consulting methodology. You know, there might be another step that goes back to the beginning, so you're constantly improving and whatever. But you know, and when we start working with people, there's always a discovery phase. Always, what happened before?
Yep.
What did you try? But here is really where the counterintuitive approach is the most important. And it's because you don't want to ask the same old marketing questions that they've been asked before. You know, very often I work with my clients, and they give me, you know, oh yes, we'll do this interview with you for 20 minutes, and I'll tell you everything we know. And they always find out that's not enough time. 20 minutes is basically enough time for them to regurgitate everything they've told to everybody else in the past. Well, that's not going to get us any further than before, will it? So we really need to stop them. And I love it in the discovery phase, when somebody that I'm working with says, yeah, I kind of never thought of that before. And then there's this long pause.
It happens often.
Yeah. And that's what we want. And it really comes from asking the simple questions, and driven by curiosity, as you've said a few times. So, but using this counterintuitive approach kind of short circuits the brain so that they don't give me the same old answers that they've given everybody else.
In your blog, you talked about, in the discover phase, something called reverse benefit analysis. What the heck is reverse benefit analysis?
Well, reverse benefit analysis is what we've been talking about. It's instead of going to the positive, it's looking at the negative. What is the negative that would prompt somebody to even want a solution in the first place? Most of the time, you know, there are things. Let me give you some more neuroscience. We as humans are problem-solving machines. We love to solve problems. That's the way we're wired. That's the way our civilization has evolved over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. And it's also how market segments continually get sliced and diced into finer and finer subsegments. You know, in the olden days, there was a shoe. Do you know what it was called? It was called the shoe. And
the guy that made it was last name Shoemaker.
Should probably exactly. And there was just one kind of shoe. But then over time, say, hey, this shoe is great. It'll save you from running away from the line or towards the line or whatever it is that you are running from and to. But you wouldn't want to use it for ceremonies. You know, the ceremonies that we have periodically around the campfire, that's a problem. So what, you know, we don't buy things because we want the benefit. We think we do, but we buy things and we get things and we acquire things to solve a problem. That problem will be masked by the benefit that we tell ourselves that we want. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what you're saying is it initially is the catalyst is the problem.
Yeah, and very often we're not aware of the problem until we are aware that there might be a solution. Because until then, we just live with it. Right? So that's reverse benefit analysis, is looking at the negative. What is the negative that might prompt someone to want the benefit that I offer? If you just throw the benefit at them, it'll be meaningless. Won't mean anything to them because it's not on their radar.
I took a doctorate in business. I never finished my doctorate in business, but I took my doctorate in business, and one of my courses was on the theory of intentional change. And this professor that taught the course and wrote the book was really interesting. He said that too often we only focus on our strengths and think about accentuating our strengths and focusing on our strengths and thinking about, you know, we've got strengths in finance or whatever it is, and so that's where we should look for our job and look for our future. But he said the key is also identifying and understanding your weaknesses, where you're weak, and either finding someone that's going to help you with those weaknesses, or making sure that you don't focus in or have a responsibility for your weaknesses, because you're not going to be strong in that area. And so therefore the key to success this individual, this professor said in his book, The Theory of Intentional Change, was this sort of constant revisiting and being knowledgeable about and understanding both your strengths and your weaknesses. And he said the biggest failing was that people typically only focused on their strengths because they focused only on where they should be going rather than where they should not be going. I thought that was interesting. Your second phase of dig is on identify. And you've got an interesting methodology there on identify called the universal framing technique. What the heck is the universal framing technique?
So in the discovery phase, we're going to find the things that make you crazy, things that drive you crazy, the problems that you personally wanted to solve in your own life and business. We're going to understand the stories behind it. But then the universal framings, you got to make that relevant to the people around you. You've got to almost not quite generalize it, but you want to universalize it. So how is it relevant to the people in your target group? How is it relevant to the people in your market? It can't be so specific. It comes from a very specific identification in your own life and business, but then it needs to be broadened slightly so that it becomes relevant to the people around you. So when we tell stories, and certainly motivational stories, if we're a leader, we're telling motivational stories all the time, whether we know it or not, or whether we're writing a book and sharing a story, what makes the story different are the specifics. That's what makes it unique to you. But what makes it universally interesting are the very human themes that it speaks to. Does that make sense?
The very human themes that it speaks to. Explain, please.
All right. What's the Shakespeare play, The Danish King, or Prince, or whatever? I can't remember exactly. Hamlet. Thank you. How many of us have experience with being royalty in a Danish royal kingdom in the whatever medieval
maybe
times?
Half a dozen. None of the people listening to the show.
Exactly. So what makes that story that Shakespeare wrote so universal, such a classic? Because it speaks to common themes of treachery, of who can we trust? Can we trust ourselves? Does a person's actions actually indicate their intentions? These are things that we deal with all the time. Who's got my back? Who says they've got my back but doesn't? Who really wants to overthrow or take what I have? You know, and is this going to drive me crazy? So that's an example in classic literature that very few people will remember, but it's in every single story, in every movie, whether it's a drama, a comedy, or whatever. The movies are all the same. Books are almost always the same. They're like, what, 7 themes in the whole world? But that's the point. They're gazillion different stories because there are a gazillion different circumstances. But there are only a certain number of very, very human themes that we all resonate with. So I say, what makes the story different is what makes you unique, but what the universal aspect of the story is what makes people remember it and resonate with it. Those are the very human themes.
That's
and
great.
In business,
I think you're right, because that's, as I said, that's what sort of makes you vulnerable, authentic, and what grabs people.
And it plays people, we've learned, or we've been led to believe that we need to keep all this personal and emotional stuff quite separate from our business and professional stuff. But really, they come together, and you're doing everybody a disservice, including yourself, if you're not understanding and bringing them together, seeing how they fit.
So in your dig methodology, it's D for discover, I for identify, and I love the G, galvanize.
Galvanize.
Because galvanize is so much more powerful than implement or decide. It's galvanize. It's very intense. Tell me about galvanize, and how does one galvanize?
Galvanize is what I call the rallying cry. It's not, it can be in the tagline, but it's not necessarily in the tagline. These things are all unique to, that's why it's so hard to kind of give an example. Everything is unique to the specific challenges that the people and the companies are facing. But galvanize is the thing that speaks to that speaks to really what drives people to want to move forward with this. It's the thing that makes people want to rally around your vision. It's the thing that makes investors say, yeah, we need this in the world and it's worth doing, and I'll make a profit. It's what employees and staff will work longer than they have to because they buy into it. It's the rallying cry. It's why we're in this battle.
I love that. You think about like the vision statement. The vision statement is too often just a bunch of platitudes stuck on the wall. But the way you describe it as a rallying cry that galvanizes people is so much more powerful.
Yeah.
That's
mission,
great.
vision. I'm not going to dislodge any company that wants to do their mission and vision. Let them do it. It is important, but the mistake that they make is they'll bring me in after they think they've settled on their mission and vision. You can't figure out the mission and vision until you figure out the problem, the core problem that you solve. And that's what I do.
But yet what you do is you take them to the rallying cry, which is far more powerful than the mission vision. This is fascinating. This is really great, Michel. I really appreciate it. We got to take a break. And, I think when we come back, I'm going to ask you about your efforts in music, because that's a whole new different thing that that you're into. And I think that we should explore that a little bit if we could.
Would love to.
We're going to take a break for 2 minutes, come back with Michel Neray of digging deeper to figure out what your core message is, your core differentiating. He's got this dig methodology. Dig is discover, I is identify, G is galvanize, to try to figure out what the rallying cry is. And I really think that there's a lot of secrets, a lot of truth, a lot of power in what Michel is talking about in trying to figure out what your signature story is, what your core message is, what your differentiating factor is, and then taking it further by turning it into a rallying cry for your position, for your company, for your brand, for your tagline, for your mission and vision, whoever you're going to be, or your company's going to be in the future. Fascinating. Thank you, Michel. Stay with us. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine to be chatting tonight with Michel Neray. He is someone who I've looked up to for, I guess, about 10, 15 years now, since we first met, Michel, in Mo Mondays. And you now got Neray.com, which is a coaching business and a business where you tell people how to figure out what their core problems are and core stories, and how to figure it out to differentiate themselves and or their companies in the future. And I love that. And so your dig methodology of discover, identify, galvanize is great. And I really, I got to tell you, I thought your Mo Mondays when you were doing those were excellent as well. And really allowed people to get up on stage, try public speaking, try out their story, try to motivate people, try to make connections. And one of the things that was, well, there were lots of things that were great about those, but one of the things that was great about those is that people did network. And, I ended up, I got to tell you, I ended up working for Jimmy Pattison at one point in time. And Pattison, $9 billion billionaire, self-made man, he would take people on a boat trip. And then on the boat trip, and he warned people ahead of time about this, he would give them 2 or 3 minutes to speak to the whole boat. And he'd have, 50, 70 people on the boat. It was a big boat. It was the largest privately owned yacht in Canada at one point in time. And people would stand up and they would speak about something compelling to them for a couple of minutes. And it was really powerful. And I asked him once, why he did that. And he said, very rarely in life do people get a couple of minutes to stand up in front of a bunch of their peers and uninterrupted tell them all about something that's important to them, something they're passionate about. And it's true. Very rarely do we actually have a chance to stand up uninterrupted and tell people about something that's important or passionate, or we're passionate about. And it led to a understanding of some of those people that were, in business with us or just associates of us, about what they were interested in, passionate about, reading about, wanted to take a couple of minutes and tell people about. And you got to know people so much deeper than you otherwise would have in just a casual conversation. That's what you did with Mo Mondays, is you gave people the opportunity to uninterrupted stand up. I think you were, I can't remember, it was 10 minutes or something like that. But to stand up and actually talk to people uninterrupted for a couple of minutes about something that they're passionate about is a really unique opportunity. And I think it gave me an opportunity to meet a whole bunch of people that you introduced me to through that process, that I've stayed friends with or in connection with, and understand them to a far greater degree than I ever otherwise would. And so thank you for that opportunity.
You're welcome.
But you're now embarked on something new that gives people the opportunity to actually stand up on stage and perform music, I understand, which is another incredible opportunity. Tell me about that, if you could.
So, when I was a little kid, I tried playing guitar, and it was a dismal failure. And I thought my classmates making fun of me, and got embarrassed. And a week later, the guitar that my parents borrowed from, it was a very expensive guitar, I put it on a chair and it fell and broke. And it's funny how these things happen, right? And that was the end of my guitar playing days. And I just convinced myself I'd never be able to play. And it just wasn't for me. And then, literally 50 years later, friend is over at my house visiting me from Winnipeg, and she brings her little ukulele, and I pick it up and I try a few chords that I kind of remember, and I thought, oh my God, I think I could do this. And this deeply repressed passion that I had for music kind of came out. And I bought a ukulele. The next day, I went on a canoe trip, and I annoyed all my canoe tripping friends with trying to learn. But what it did do is it really put me on a path. And it was such an amazing and empowering thing when I started to be able to learn how to use it. And it became a wellspring of creativity, long repressed creativity. And now I've got an album on Spotify, and I play gigs all the time, and yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to be hopefully playing at festivals this summer, and have a band, and not in a million years, if you had said, Michel, you're going to do this, would I have expected? I would have said, you're crazy, no way. But I am, and I did, and I became a little bit stupidly passionate and obsessed about it. And COVID helped. COVID helped because it gave me the time to actually dedicate to practicing, rehearsing, and writing these songs that I didn't know were in me. What I realized was that all these songs speak on the same themes as in the stories that I talk about in Mo Mondays and in my keynotes and workshops. There's a real similarity to how I approach my songwriting. Funnily enough, when I was starting to write songs, and I would bring it to my guitar teacher, and I said, I think the first verse should do this, and the second verse should do this, but I don't really know what I'm doing here. And he looks at me and he said, Michel, how do you do that? I said, what? He said, how do you already know the arc of the story in the song? I said, what? I don't know. And he said, nobody I've ever met really does that. And it occurred to me that really I've been doing it for 40 years without
Just not set to
realizing.
music.
Yeah. just not to music. Exactly. So I understand story, and a lot of my songs are story songs, and people seem to like them because I understand the underlying themes that I want to come out and have them identify with. So this thing that I'm doing, I'm experimenting. Haven't even done my first one. I haven't announced this yet, Brian.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
But we're looking at taking the Mo Mondays concept and adapting it to music. So bringing songwriters and asking them for the story behind the songs and have them think about it a little bit more deeply than just, I wrote this on a bus on the way home. Because sometimes that's how they introduce their songs. Uh, but there's understanding the theme and being able to articulate the theme and then playing the music and making it much more impactful and more meaningful to the audience. So that's one of the things that I'm working on.
I was chairman of the Mississauga City Summit at one point in time, and that morphed into being president of the Mississauga Arts Council. I went on a big seminar for creativity out of those two different efforts. And I can't even remember who the person was, but it was a keynote speaker that came from the UK and talked about success in performance. And it was not just in art, and it wasn't just in music performance. It was in any kind of art, I guess. And what they said really stuck with me. And it's sort of back to the topic that we've been talking about for the last half hour, 45 minutes. And that was, you've got to have a message.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to want people to listen to you or look at your painting or look at listen to your drama or whatever, it can't just be there. It can't be nothing. It has to have a message in it. It has to have content. And this individual said that if you want to get up on stage, make sure that you've got a voice and a message that is compelling, that people want to hear. I think that's the same thing, isn't it? It's the signature story.
It's exactly the same thing. But I'll tell you the mistake that a lot of people make, and unfortunately, it's this kind of advice, while it's incredibly true and accurate and important and all of that stuff and valuable, there's a little bit of a disservice in it. Because then people walk away from that thinking, well, if I don't know what my message is, and if I don't have a voice, and I don't think I say anything differently, then I must not have anything worthwhile to say. And so they never embark on that creative journey. But what I've discovered is, my dad, my dad had a saying. It was a French saying. He said, "Le faim vient en mangeant." French. It says, hunger comes during the eating. And how it applies to creativity and message and voice is very often when we start out on a creative journey, we don't know what our message is. We don't know what our voice is. We don't know what human themes we feel particularly connected to. We only discover them on the journey. And for some people, it's step 5, and some people it's step 500. But that's the magic of the journey. And sometimes Mo Mondays, well, I really don't mean to go back to Mo Mondays because it doesn't figure as strongly in my life and business as it used to. But people would come to me and says, "Oh, I know what my story is." And I said, "You don't know what your story is until you've told it 100 times. Then you know your story." Because every time you tell it, you're going to say, "Oh, I left out a detail. Was it important? Why did I leave it out? Or I added in a detail I've never added in before. Why? Oh my God. That's the real meaning of this story. That's happened to me. I'm a professional speaker. I tell stories all the time. And yet, sometimes it happens where I'll say, wow, I just discovered a new layer to this story that I never would have discovered if I had not told it already 100 times. So the journey is really important. And just because you don't know what your message is, just because you think you don't have a voice, just because you think you don't have anything different to say than anybody else, don't let that stop you. Sorry if I sound a little bit impassioned here.
I think it's a really important comment to make, and it's the same in your speech making for whatever. It's the same in companies. It's the same in music. It's that you start and you go through this discover process, as you identified in the dig methodology. You got to go through that discover process. You got to be curious. You got to think about what it is, and it's not going to come to you right away. If it did, it would all be easy, and it's not easy. And that's why you say in your program and in what you sent out, you got to dig deeper, and the digging deeper is what develops the story and develops your knowledge of what is the kernel of truth in your story. And so I think it's great advice. And so I agree. Get started. The journey is the fun. It's it's those old lines about we all, are born and regrettably we'll all die. But the key is the dash in the middle. It's the journey. It's the fun that you've got. And that's what your life is all about, is the dash in the middle of those two dates. And the journey is challenging. And has some ups and downs, but it's the journey. It's the beauty of what living is all about. I was at a dance recently, and the guy said there was a granny that got up dancing. It was kind of fun. She showed up with a fur coat, fur stool that she probably hadn't worn in I don't know how many years, and she got up dancing. And someone turned to me and said, "It's that old adage of you don't stop dancing when you get old. You get old when you stop dancing." And it's the journey is what counts.
And
Michel Neray,
replace the word dancing with play and with anything you're passionate about. Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Michel, you're a treasure. Thank you so much for chatting with us this evening. I really appreciate it. Good luck with your music. Good luck with your coaching, and I look forward to connecting up with you again in one of our different events sometime.
I hope so too, Brian. Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. I thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts are on podcast servers. All my webcasts are on social media, including YouTube. Michel Neray, you can contact at neray.com. Thanks, everybody. Good night.